Recently, I've been watching a lot of content about things like art and creativity, and it's made me think a lot about, I don't know, what I get out of art, why I'm creative, where my creative inspirations come from. And that's a real rabbit hole because it's so vague that there's like a cajillion things that you could think of. But it made me think that I would really quite like to make a video or some videos talking about some of my creative inspirations. Not just for the sake of sharing. I do think it is really nice to be able to hear about those things from artists and other creatives, but also for the purpose of like me kind of being in the process of fashioning what my artistic universe is. One thing I feel really passionate about with regards to my music projects and whatnot is that I'm not just making music, but I am building this universe of storytelling and art and whatever around all of that. And so I feel really drawn to other artists who are doing very much the same thing. And it means that I'm actually constantly on the lookout for places from which I can derive artistic inspiration right now. And that does mean that I look for art in places that maybe previously I wouldn't have. And that's really cool. This could in theory get really long because art covers so many different things. So I think for this video at least, I'm going to stick to just music artists. But I might make a video in the future talking about visual artists and fiction and whatever. I made a list in my mini sketchbook of the people who I wanted to include in this. This is the daddy sketchbook. Anyway, I made a list in my mini sketchbook. Oh, it's right next to this cool drawing I did of me. Okay. So there isn't necessarily an order to these people that I'm going to talk about. So let's just start with the artist who I think friends of mine probably are the most sick of hearing me talk about, and that's Grimes. I'm not even like a years-long Grimes fan. I wasn't around when Visions came out. I don't remember when Art Angels was released. I'm from, I guess, the Miss Anthropocene era, but I find her such a fascinating and inspirational and aspirational idea and personification of how I think exploring art should be. And I use the word should loosely because there is no way to really define that. But in terms of for me and my ideal, I love the way she goes about her art. I don't love every single song that Grimes has done. I love a lot of them. I really, really adore her artwork. I love the way that she pushes genres. I love the way that she actually isn't too strict on herself about how to even approach things like genre. If she's writing an album, she's not sat there rocking backwards and forwards in a corner thinking, oh my God, is this fitting the genre that I've set out for this album well enough? She's just like, yeah, I felt like writing a techno song. Yeah, I really wanted to like take inspiration from this thing. Yeah, I just picked up the violin for this song. Like, that's cool. So I think the variety of her music is a really big thing for me because for me, when I started making music, I started making music many years ago, but just didn't like release anything. You know, I was learning how to produce. I was doing these things for myself for fun. And I did a lot of experimenting, but I still kind of had this idea of the overarching kind of like theme. And then when I actually first released music, I released my Letter to the Stars EP. It sounded nothing like anything I'd ever made before. It was far more, I don't even think pop is the right word for that EP because every single song in it has a completely different sound, but it didn't sound like anything I'd ever made. And then after that, I started to have this sort of existential crisis where I was like, oh my God, like I've set out to be an EDM artist and I want to make house music and no one is going to think I'm a house producer. They're gonna think I'm something else, and that scares the shit out of me. And I would say, yeah, for like a year that was sort of in the back of my head, and I was like, I remember releasing Welcome Back to Earth and being like, does this sound house enough for people, or does this sound like dance pop? Are people gonna think this is dance pop? Now I'm like, dance pop's fucking cool. And I feel so much less strongly about that stuff, you know, and I feel a lot more free to kind of embrace different subgenres and for it to not even be a consideration when I'm making a song. And she is just the absolute queen of that. She's so good at it, and that is absolutely her thing, which I really appreciate. I think on the topic of kind of building a universe around your artwork and for it to not just be music, she's done a really good job of that as well. She's not the only person in this list that I'm going to mention this for, but the themes of a lot of things that she writes about are so narrative heavy, and they tell really enriching stories that build up this idea of her and who she is and what her place in this universe is. And they're not just kind of like bland. And she does supplement that really well with her visual art as well, both her original, artwork that she draws, her music videos that she's made with her brother a ton of times. Like, holy crap, I wish my brother would make music videos with me, but I mean, he lives a little way away and would tell me to fuck off. But and then to a lesser extent, the AI art that she's done, that's not something I am super in favor of, so we'll kind of park that one. But she's still exploring different avenues of visual art, which I think does tie into the whole thing. But I feel like when I listen to a Grimes album, or when I go down the route of looking at things that she has done, I feel like I'm entering into a story. I feel like there is another kind of dimension. You know how you get when you watch like a really good film series, or you read really good fiction, and you're like, wow, this actually like built upon everything I know in the world, and it added this extra layer that I would not be able to receive just by living in real life. I feel like that's a really good way of describing the effects of her art, and that's very much what I want to achieve as well. And I look to that with heart eyes and absolute admiration, because if I can do that in the same way that she does that, then that would be fucking sick. One last thing about her is that she just doesn't take herself too seriously, which I really appreciate. I am one of those people who really struggles with being on the other end of that. I am extremely afraid of failure. I get very stressed out about things. I tell myself that things have to work out a certain way, and if they don't work out that way, then I completely lose my mind. And you can just tell by watching certain things of hers on, for example, live performances, or even her like DJ sets, that she doesn't take herself too seriously. And if things go wrong, she's like, oh shit, and then she just moves on. I am not joking when I say that I've watched her EDC 2022 set a few times, and when she's like, oh my god, I already played this song, I fucked up, and the first time I saw it, I was like, you can just do that? Which honestly, for someone who has that kind of personality flaw that I have, it was like huge. The next artist that I want to talk about is an artist that I've spoken about on this channel before, and that is Overwork. It feels kind of weird to talk about him now, because I don't want to go as far as to say that we're friends, but we're definitely acquainted, and I do get to interact with him. So I'm now not just talking about this strange entity that isn't a real human. It's someone who like, oh yes, I've had interactions with you, and that's kind of odd because it sort of changes that dynamic. But for me, Overwork, when I discovered Overwork back in, I don't know, 2014, he forever changed my idea of what the ideal of EDM was. And the originality and the creativity in the way that he constructed his music, as well as harmonically how he structures a lot of his music, which for me, I mean, I'm a big music theory person. Some people aren't, some people are. For me, I've always built songs around harmonics, so I like interesting chord sequences, and he definitely does that quite a lot. But the way he structures music, and he introduces these ideas from like classical music, which again, I'm a huge fan of classical music. I take a ton of inspiration from especially Baroque era music, and it's not just kind of like your average standard house music that could be replaced with any other house music song. There's something very different about his music, almost it's kind of got this like sexy slickness to it, for lack of a better descriptor. And for me, ever since then, I was like, oh my god, this is like the blueprint of how to make house music. And I don't mean that in the sense of like, let's just copy him, but just that sense of, oh, if I hadn't have discovered that, maybe the sort of music that I would have ended up making would have been far more generic. Like, I think of when I first started learning how to produce, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to make Vocaloid music and I wanted to make trance music. And I would watch tutorials on YouTube of how to make trance music in FL Studio 11. And it would just be like, yeah, you pick these 4 chords and you want to have like an alternating octave bass and it's going to go blue, 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 and then you just do this melody. And I would do that and I'd be like, oh my God, I made a trance song. And it really was just copying the tutorials, but like it was very formulaic. And I don't know how much my music would have ended up being formulaic if I hadn't have been introduced to this music that really kind of changed my idea of like, oh shit, this is like another level of house music. It's also just proved to me that house music can be very, it can really tell a story. It can be incredibly emotive, and it can be more than just like music that you dance to. And again, as somebody who, I always loved classical music, I always loved music that had interesting harmonic structures, and I always found that the emotion came from those things even more so than lyrics. I was always like, well, yeah, like there's no reason electronic music can't be the same thing. And that just really proved it for me. He's another artist as well who does basically all of his own visual art too. He does a lot of 3D modeling, which I last year started getting in, like dipping my toes into learning how to 3D model. I had some ideas for artwork that I wanted to do for some of my music, and it was like fine, but it didn't like, I didn't find it as enjoyable as I kind of hoped that I would. So I sort of learned the skills to be able to do it, and I was like, okay, cool, I've done it. That skill set's there if I need it. But I really love what he does because he's clearly very, very talented and very skilled. And it's just another example of someone who's really built this like amazing idea of who they are and what their artistic universe is through other mediums of art. All right, let's move on to I've learned recently through YouTube that I probably should have known this. It's controversial to like this band. This is my favorite band of all time, ever since I was a tiny, tiny, tiny child, and that is Muse. And I get the vibe, and I've met a number of people over time who aren't super into them, and they kind of find them like a shittier Radiohead or a little pretentious or whatever. I watched some Anthony Fantano videos about Muse, and he had a lot of scathing things to say about them. Some were deserved. But for me, you know, albums like Showbiz and particularly Origin of Symmetry, which is my favorite album of all time, are so mind-blowing, and I have never heard anything else from a band specifically that is anything like them. There's this rock opera vibe that you get from Muse, but in just the most outstanding way. They're a little rougher around the edges than something like Queen, and the uniqueness of Matt Bellamy's voice kind of allow them to do certain things with that idea. And I kind of always fell in love with, again, they're another example of an artist whose harmonic structures I really like. You're always going to hear diminished chords in a Muse song. You're always going to hear like a major fifth in a minor chord progression. You know, it's a classic, but it's so good. So you get some very interesting and kind of unorthodox chord progressions in Muse songs, which I really love. And, you know, like arpeggios on a guitar and whatever. And it really derives a lot of inspiration as well from things like Baroque music and whatever, which again goes back to what I said I already really like. And so in terms of songwriting, I've always kind of looked to them as such a beacon of creative inspiration. I love analyzing Muse songs and going and seeing how they've built their songs. And it's interesting because one of the biggest criticisms that Muse get is about how all they can talk about these days is like the government is corrupting us and blah blah blah, and it's sort of like political but doesn't really, I mean, the way that Fantano described it was like it's political but doesn't provide a solution. And I found that really interesting, the way that he put that, because when the Resistance album came out, I listened to that whole album, and at the time, how old was I? So that album came out in 2008, 2009. So I was like 12, I think, when it came out. I wasn't quite 13 yet. And for me, I interpreted the album as being this fictional story. Like, I heard it as basically a space opera. And I still remember that story in my head. And I remember I always told my mum, I'm going to write this story. And she was like, if you do that, I'll send the manuscript to their management. And I never ended up actually writing it down because then the school got hard and busy, you know. But I heard each song as telling this very cohesive, like, love story, like sci-fi love story. And for me, I was like, whoa, this is insane. Like, this is next level genius when it comes to writing music and thematics and how to really like enrich this kind of medium of art. And actually that was something that I started getting disappointed with their later albums, was I thought The Second Law was basically a less good version of the same kind of concept. And then Simulation Theory was obviously like a very different stylistic kind of vibe, but that's where we sort of got into the like, oh, the politics vibe is here to stay. And I say that as if Black Holes and Revelations and Absolution weren't very political albums anyway, but I digress. The point is, I always heard that and I was like, this is so fucking cool that I can listen to this album and I like envision a movie playing out in front of me, and I know what these characters are doing, and I know what their motivations are, and I know how they feel, and I know who's good, I know who's evil, I know like all this colorful freaking Technicolor universe is playing out in front of me, and I don't even know if that was their like intention. It actually it wasn't until many years later that I actually realized that that's probably not what their interpretation of their own album was, but the fact I could have that interpretation was amazing, and that was such a phenomenal artistic experience for me, and a very formative one as well. And particularly at that age where, like, yes, I was already interested in music, I did music-y things, but that was around the age where I was kind of old enough to actually pay attention to what the world was saying to me, and to start to construct those things myself in terms of writing music and looking into how other people have constructed their music. So for me, I will never be able to like discount that. Also, if you've ever been to a Muse show before, you will know that they are experiences. I would imagine it's how the pop girlies feel about Beyonce shows, to be honest, from what I've read. But I've seen Muse 5 or 6 times, and they never fail to impress. And again, to me, that just adds to this sense of like, this is like a universe that you are building, and this is something that I can step into, and I am wrapped up in it, and I'm surrounded by it and cocooned within it for however long I am experiencing that art for, and I can step back out into the real world afterwards, and I can feel like I've been transported to another dimension in that time. And for me, that is just the greatest thing that an artist can ever do to someone who is experiencing their art. So whether or not you like Muse, I just don't think you can deny that that's something they've done well. In here, I've also got written down Magdalena Bay. So Magdalena Bay are a duo that I have become a huge fan of in the last 2 years. Their 2021 album, Mercurial World, is one of my favorite albums of all time. I'm not a big album listener in general, so if you can get me to sit and fall in love with an album of yours, then you've done something really well. But for them, a lot of it for me is like, their sound design is so absolutely pristine, and they have their kind of characterization of themselves that is displayed in things like their music videos and their visual art and even their freaking website. And the funny thing is the way that they represent their visual art isn't necessarily reflective of what I am going for. You know, I don't look at their art and go like, oh, I kind of want to try and emulate something like that, but I look at it and I go, this fits so well what they are making. Like, they've made something that has such a defined character, and I think that's really cool. And yeah, like I said, I love their sound design. I listen to their music so much and I'm like, how did they make that bass? And the great thing is they do like little production workshop things, like live streams on their YouTube channel where they actually tell you how they made that bass. So thanks, Magdalena Bay. Now I can close the book. This is kind of book that you look at and you're like, there must be so many cool secrets in here, but it's mostly empty. I did a cool design. Look at this. I got this cool fabric and I designed this men's cape because I really love the Billy Porter gray and pink cape suit thing, and so I got really into capes for men, and I was like, this is like a sparkly like rose pattern. I'm getting really distracted. I feel like I could sit and talk about this stuff forever. It would be a lot of fun to do this kind of thing on a podcast, but I don't have a podcast and I don't know who would want to make a podcast about this sort of thing with me. So for now, I'll just sit on my floor and do it myself. But I really love this topic of conversation, and I've been really enjoying listening to other people talk about this kind of thing on YouTube recently. So I would definitely love to make a video in the future talking about specifically like visual artists or fiction. I'm really in this huge I just love consuming art, especially in the last couple of years. I mean, this is maybe going a little bit like off topic, but when I released Letter to the Stars 2 years ago, it was not 2 years ago. When I released Letter to the Stars just over 1 year ago, I just felt such a burning need to put art out into the world, and that I had so much to say and I wanted to say it in a specific way, and that burning need hasn't gone away. And I've experienced a lot of loss in the last couple of years, and I feel like there is this like burning feeling inside of me that's like, no one can take your art away from you, and all you can do is like constantly iterate on it and make it better and make more and put creativity and artwork into the world. And that feels like such a calling to me at the moment. You can see my pajamas. Fuck. I just want to constantly find new ways to add dimension and add more to that, and I'm just one person with only so much time. So yeah, we should talk about this more in the future. I have a new song coming out on the 28th of March. It's called Enter the Requiem, so make sure you pre-save that. The link will be down below, and I really hope you guys enjoy it. Thank you so much for watching. Let's talk about this some more and I will see you soon.